Hey everyone, welcome back to Horsetooth Cinema, and today I'm going to be reviewing Bodies, 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 which just came out this past August and was directed by Helena Rain, I think is her name. This is a new horror comedy movie, very much advertising itself as a slasher that satirizes Gen Z, and as I'll get into, it's not really a slasher, it's much more of a murder mystery, sort of whodunit type of movie. It's basically about a group of rich teenagers who go to a party for the weekend, and as the weather starts to turn sour, they get stuck in the house, and they decide to play a game called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And once they start, real bodies actually begin to pile up pretty fast. I go to movie theaters a fair amount, and I started seeing the trailer for this a couple of months ago, and I really thought it looked awful. You could tell that it meant to be a Gen Z satire rather than taking itself too seriously. But the execution of it just looked so, obvious, on the nose, and just kind of annoying overall. There's a section of the trailer where characters are just spitting a bunch of Gen Z vocabulary at each other, like gaslighting, toxic, triggered, stuff like that. Again, very on the nose, and it just kind of made it seem like the movie was going to pander to Gen Z. The characters came off as very annoying. Some of the casting choices were just odd. They made it look like Pete Davidson would be in the movie quite a bit. Pete Davidson from such fine films as the Marmaduke remake that came out this year. But I have to say, this movie was nowhere near as awful as I thought it would be. I am torn on it. I can't really say I liked the movie, as I'll get into, but I definitely didn't hate it. But I'm not surprised to hear a lot of my friends and just people of my generation especially praising this movie, because it definitely has its merits, as I'll get into. But overall, it just didn't work for me. So I want to start talking about those merits, but first I just want to say that this is a movie where you can't really talk about either the merits or the flaws without getting into spoilers. So I'm just going to talk full spoilers for this, and you guys have been warned now, so if you haven't seen the movie, I'd recommend going and check that out first. So yeah, in terms of what I liked about the movie, first of all, surprisingly, I did like a lot of the performances in it. I was really surprised in particular to see Pete Davidson utilized so well. I mean, he has a lot of the best jokes, and he's probably the best part of the Gen Z satire in my opinion. His lines feel a lot more creative and weird, and they just feel less dependent on sort of cliche Gen Z lingo than a lot of the other characters in the movie. He sells the character as a rich little shit who's just really entitled, completely self-centered. And I think it's a really interesting aspect of Gen Z to satirize, just entitlement especially, especially with the idea that we've grown up in the digital age, and how that sort of distracted us from more important things in life, and how it's made us more self-centered as people, and the way social media contributes to that. And I could have easily seen the movie try to overuse Pete Davidson just because of how famous he is, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that he's the first body to fall. Rachel Sennett was also a standout performance for me, though I don't think her character was used quite as well as Pete Davidson's character in terms of the satire. Just her performance I thought was great. She captures a lot of the most annoying and eye-rolling aspects of my generation. And I thought it was really funny how a lot of people seem to be praising her performance, saying things like queen, like she's, a star of our generation, and it's like, the intention of the film is very clearly trying to portray her as this annoying little shit in the same way as Pete Davidson is. And though I didn't really care for her writing, as I'll get into, I just really liked the way that she, just her mannerisms and the way and her line delivery. She really sold a lot of those aspects really well in terms of being annoying, entitled, etc. The other thing I really liked was the general idea behind the conclusion of the movie, the sort of twist ending. And again, spoilers, but by the end of the movie, there's been all this, murder and carnage in the house. People have turned on each other in a very McCarthyist way, trying to figure out who was the person that initially killed Pete Davidson's character, who again was the first one to die. But they end up finding out with a video on Pete Davidson's phone that he was not murdered in the first place. He was doing a TikTok video trying to go viral or something, and he ended up slashing his throat with a machete that he had. So he basically, accidentally died for a social media challenge, which is a real thing that a lot of, that's happened if you look at things like the Tide Pod challenge and stuff like that. So all of this literal backstabbing that's been going on for, the remainder of the movie has been for nothing. The ending did make my brother and I crack up quite a bit. I think that's definitely the intention of it. Again, it's sort of a horror comedy with a satirical edge, so I do think the ending is meant to be very funny. I like movies like this where it has like a ridiculous twist ending. And it's taken very seriously by the film, even though the ending itself is kind of hilarious. I'm thinking of something like David Fincher's The Game, Or something I watched very recently and kind of loved. I don't understand the hate for it. Stephen Knight's Serenity is a fucking great movie. It's a really cool idea in Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. You know, the idea of the satirical traits of this generation sort of getting them into this place, leading them away from logic and more into chaos. And I really like how that's woven into this sort of murder mystery genre film. But as much as I like the idea, I don't really like the execution of it. Because as much as people have been pitching this as a pitch perfect satire of Gen Z, I just don't think it is at all. For one, as the trailer suggested, it's just way too obvious and on the nose with its satire. I saw it with my brother who, you know, pretty much hated the film actually, and we were talking a lot about it on the way home and kind of what didn't work for us, and that's kind of what we ended up concluding, is that it's just a little bit too obvious for the whole time in its execution. Those lines I mentioned that were in the trailer, you know, gaslighting, toxic, triggered, etc., they're just as cringy in the movie as they are in the trailer. They're not like used better or anything like that, because they're just, you know, it just comes off as the most obvious thing that the filmmaker could think of, and it does kind of come off as pandering a little bit. And you could say something like, well, you know, it's a satire, it's supposed to be a little bit exaggerated. And I agree with that, of course. I mean, there are great satires that are a little bit ridiculous, but there's got to be a line somewhere. And this just came off as, again, just way too obvious with its exaggerations. It stepped over the line from satire into farce. But much more importantly, the fact that the satire is so obvious makes it really easy actually to figure out the eventual conclusion of the movie. As characters started to murder each other and stuff like that, I kept thinking, well, you know, we're not really getting any insight as to who the killer is. It's just sort of these satirical elements creating chaos within the house. Okay, so where could that lead us? It might lead us to somewhere like there was no murder from the beginning, he died by accident. So the more you think about the execution of it, the easier it is to figure out the ending, and therefore the lamer the ending kind of is. And as far as the ending goes, again, I do like the idea of it much more than I like the execution of it. But even the idea itself does feel a little bit like a parody. It's funny that this movie was made by A24 because in the way that some A24 horror movies never reveal what the literal horror was in the movie, this, you know, reveals that there literally was no murder mystery. So in the way that movies like It Comes at Night kind of ruined the literal genre horror, Bodies, Bodies, Bodies ruins the kind of murder mystery genre aspects a little bit for me. So while I kind of admired what the movie was trying to do, and I was, in general, I mean, I was kind of entertained throughout, I was definitely following it, I was with it for a lot of the runtime, especially once we get to the ending, the more I started to think about it, the less I liked how they executed it. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 2.5 stars. In terms of whether I'd recommend it, I'm kind of torn on that. I mean, I think it's really interesting to check out. But in terms of like, was it a very satisfying movie experience? In that sense, no, I wouldn't recommend it. That's my review anyway. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, you can like it down below and subscribe to the channel if you want. I've got more content coming out soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.